She thought he was just a poor cowboy, a man with nothing but dust on his boots and calluses on his hands. But one evening under the burning sunset of the wild prairies, the truth would shake her to her core. Because the man she pitied, the man she once ignored, was in fact the richest cowboy in the entire state. And he hadn't opened his heart to anyone in years. What happened when their worlds collided will leave you speechless. But before we dive into this unforgettable story of love, loss, and revelation, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Gentle Words, so you never miss the stories that touch your heart and inspire your soul. The wind howled across the open plains, carrying with it the scent of dust, horses, and wild sage, the kind of wind that could tell stories if one only listened long enough. And on this evening it carried the story of a young woman named Claire Dawson, who had always believed she had life figured out until the day she crossed paths with a stranger who seemed to have nothing but the clothes on his back and a beaten down hat pulled low over his eyes. A stranger who everyone in town assumed was just another drifter, one of those cowboys who wandered from ranch to ranch searching for odd jobs, never staying long enough to build roots, never having enough money to be more than a shadow on the road. And Claire, with her guarded heart and fierce independence, looked at him with the same suspicion she gave most men who drifted into her life, because she had been hurt before, abandoned by promises that never came true. And she told herself she would never again fall for a man who had nothing to offer but charm and empty dreams. Yet something about him, something in the way his dark eyes seemed older than his face, something in the way he carried himself with quiet strength, as though the weight of an entire world rested on his shoulders, caught her attention and lingered like an echo she couldn't shake, even when she told herself she didn't care. His name, though she didn't know it yet, was Luke Callahan, and the folks in town had their own stories about him, most of them unkind, whispering that he was poor, that he had been run off from other places, that he had no future except the dirt under his boots. But Luke never bothered to defend himself. He simply tipped his hat, offered a quiet word when needed, and got back to work, mending fences, breaking horses, doing whatever job would earn him a warm meal at the end of the day. And it was in those quiet, unguarded moments, when Claire saw him working alone under the relentless sun, or leading a wild colt with patience that few men possessed, that she began to wonder if there was more to this man than the stories told. She ran the small diner in town, inherited from her late father, and most evenings, Luke would wander in after long hours, dust covering his boots, his shirt clinging with sweat, and he would order nothing more than black coffee and a slice of pie, never asking for more, never lingering too long, always leaving a few crumpled bills on the counter before disappearing back into the night. And Claire, though she tried not to care, noticed the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching, the way his eyes softened when he caught sight of a family sitting together in a booth, as if somewhere deep inside him was a wound too old and too deep for words. She thought of him as poor, of course. How could she not? His clothes were worn, his boots patched, his hat frayed at the edges, and when he smiled, it was the smile of a man who had long ago accepted his lot in life, a man with nothing to offer. And yet, something about him stirred a restlessness inside her that she had buried for years, the same restlessness her mother once warned her about, the kind that could break a woman if she wasn't careful. One evening, when the sky was painted in shades of fire and gold, Luke came into the diner later than usual, his steps slower, his shoulders heavier, and Claire, against her better judgment, walked over to his booth instead of waiting for him to come to the counter. And she asked if he wanted more than just coffee tonight, her voice sharper than she intended, as though daring him to prove that he could afford a full meal. And Luke, with that quiet, unreadable expression, simply looked up at her and said, "If it's no trouble, ma'am, maybe just a plate of whatever's hot." Something in his tone, gentle but weary, caught her off guard, and before she realized what she was doing, she brought him the heartiest meal she had, roast beef with mashed potatoes and bread fresh from the oven, more than he had ordered, more than he could pay for. And when he reached into his pocket to count out the worn bills, she stopped him, muttering that he could settle up later, though deep inside she told herself it was just pity, nothing more. But pity wasn't what she felt when she watched him eat. When she saw the way he closed his eyes for a moment, as though savoring not just the food, but the memory of something he had lost. As though he had once known what it was to have a home, a family, a place in the world, and now was left with only scraps. The town kept its distance from Luke, and so did Claire, at least on the surface. Yet fate has a way of weaving people together in the most unexpected ways, and the night everything began to shift was the night of the storm, when rain pounded the land and wind rattled the windows of the diner. And just as Claire was locking up, she saw Luke struggling with his horse outside, the animal spooked and refusing to settle. And without thinking, she grabbed her coat and ran into the storm, shouting at him to bring the horse into the shed out back, and together, soaked and shivering, they managed to calm the beast. For the first time, she was close enough to see the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the way his jaw clenched not from anger but from some unspoken grief, and when their eyes met, there was a flicker of something unguarded, something raw that neither of them spoke about. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice almost lost in the storm, and she found herself standing there, rain dripping from her hair, unable to speak, because in that moment she realized she had never heard him say so much in all the weeks he had been in town. What Claire didn't know, what no one in town could have guessed, was that Luke Callahan wasn't poor at all. He was the wealthiest rancher in the state, heir to an empire of cattle and land stretching farther than the eye could see, but wealth had never shielded him from tragedy, and years ago, when he lost the woman he loved and the child they were supposed to raise together, he walked away from it all, disappearing into the dust, choosing to live as a drifter because money meant nothing without love, and the burden of wealth only reminded him of everything he had lost. He had been searching, not for riches, not for power, but for a reason to live again, and though he hadn't admitted it even to himself, that reason was beginning to take shape in the eyes of the woman who thought he was poor. The woman who brought him meals she didn't charge for, the woman who saw past the dust and the silence, even if she didn't yet realize it. The morning after the storm, when the land smelled of wet earth, and the sun broke through clouds as though the world itself was reborn, Claire found herself thinking of Luke more than she wanted to admit. His quiet thank you echoing in her ears, and though she told herself it meant nothing, that he was just another drifter who would be gone by the end of the season, her heart betrayed her each time the door of the diner opened, and she looked up hoping it was him, and when it was, something inside her softened even as she scolded herself for being foolish, for allowing hope to creep into places she had long ago locked away. Luke continued to sit at his usual booth, still ordering little, still paying with crumpled bills. But now when he looked at her there was something gentler in his gaze, something that lingered as though he saw more in her than just a waitress serving pie. And Claire, though she tried to mask it with brisk words and sharp movements, felt her defenses slowly unravel. Days turned into weeks, and in that time, they shared more than food and coffee. They shared silences that spoke louder than words, glances that lingered too long, and moments when their laughter filled the small diner like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. And yet, beneath it all, there was always a shadow, a weight in Luke's eyes that she could not name, as though he carried secrets too heavy to speak aloud, and she wondered if that weight was the reason he wandered, the reason he seemed both near and far all at once. One evening, after the last customers had left and Claire was wiping down the counters, Luke lingered, his hat in his hands. And for the first time he asked her something personal. "Do you ever dream of leaving this town?" His voice was low, hesitant, as though the question mattered more than he wanted her to know, and Claire, surprised, paused before answering. "I used to once. But dreams don't pay the bills, and this diner is all I have left." He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing her answer against some unspoken truth of his own, then nodded slowly, slipping his hat back on before walking out into the night, and Claire stood there, her heart beating faster than it should have, wondering why a simple question had left her so unsettled. That night, she dreamed of wide-open plains and horses running free, of laughter carried on the wind, and when she woke, she couldn't shake the image of Luke standing at her side, though she knew it was foolish to imagine such things. But fate has a way of bringing hidden truths to light, and the turning point came on the day of the county fair, when the whole town gathered for rides, contests, and the annual cattle auction, an event where ranchers displayed their herds and fortunes were made in a single afternoon. Claire went with a few friends, determined to enjoy herself, yet she couldn't stop her eyes from searching the crowd for Luke, and when she found him, standing at the edge of the auction ring, quiet and unassuming, she felt the now familiar tug in her chest. The auction began, bids flying fast, numbers climbing higher than most folks could count, and just as the largest lot of prime cattle was brought forward, Claire watched in disbelief as Luke raised his hand, his voice steady as he offered a sum so staggering it silenced the crowd. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. How could a poor drifter afford such a bid? But the auctioneer accepted it without hesitation, calling Luke by name. And in that moment Claire realized with shock that not only did Luke know these men, but they knew him, respected him, treated him not as an outsider, but as someone of power. Before she could gather her thoughts, Luke won the lot, his check written on the spot, and the truth crashed down on her like a wave. He wasn't poor at all, he wasn't a drifter scraping by. He was a man of immense wealth, the richest cowboy in the state, and she had been blind to it all this time. The revelation left Claire shaken, her mind spinning with questions. Why had he hidden it? Why had he let her believe he had nothing? Why had he lived so simply when he could have had anything? When she confronted him later, her voice trembling with anger and confusion, Luke didn't deny it. It's true, he said quietly, his eyes shadowed with pain. I own more land than I can ride across in a lifetime, more cattle than I could ever count. But what good is any of it, Claire, when the people I loved most are gone? Money couldn't save them, and it sure as hell can't bring them back. His words struck her silent, her anger dissolving into something softer, something like sorrow, because in his voice she heard the truth of a man broken not by poverty but by loss. He told her of his wife, a gentle woman with laughter like spring rain, and the child they had lost together, a future stolen too soon, and how after that he had walked away from his empire, unable to bear the emptiness of wealth without love. Claire listened, her heart aching, and for the first time she understood the man behind the dust and silence, a man who had once had everything yet felt he had nothing at all. Their relationship changed after that night, though not in the way Claire expected. She thought wealth might put distance between them, a wall she could never climb, but instead it brought them closer, because she realized Luke wasn't a rich man pretending to be poor. He was a broken man searching for meaning, and in her presence he found a piece of that meaning again. They spent more time together, walking the fields at sunset, riding horses under skies painted with stars, sharing stories of their pasts and fears for the future, and slowly, painfully, Luke began to heal. Claire, too, found herself healing, her loneliness easing, her guarded heart daring to hope once more. Yet love, fragile as it was, came with trials, for the town gossiped endlessly. Some saying Claire was chasing his money, others claiming Luke was a fool for courting a diner girl, and though their words stung, Luke silenced them with a single statement. She saw me when all you saw was dust. That's worth more than every dollar I've got. His words spread through the town, silencing most. But in Claire's heart they lit a fire she had never known before. A love that felt fierce and enduring, the kind her mother once told her was rare and worth fighting for. But love is never without fear, and Claire wrestled with her own doubts. Could she truly belong in his world, a world of sprawling ranches and endless wealth, when she was just a woman holding onto a diner that barely survived? Would his grief ever fully release him, or would she always compete with the memory of the woman he had lost? These doubts gnawed at her even as she fell deeper into him, and one evening, as they sat beneath the stars, she asked the question that had haunted her. Why me, Luke? You could have anyone, someone with more to offer, why me? He looked at her then, his eyes steady, his voice carrying the weight of truth. Because you're the only one who ever saw me, Claire. Not the money, not the legend, not the man people think I am. You saw me. And that's all I've ever needed. His words broke through the last of her fear, and in that moment she knew that love wasn't about riches or pasts. It was about seeing and being seen. About healing together in the spaces where pain once lived. As the days turned to months, their bond deepened, and Luke slowly began to step back into the life he had abandoned. Not for the sake of wealth, but for the sake of building a future with Claire. He opened his ranch again, not as a monument to power, but as a place of community, offering work to those in need, food to families who struggled, turning his fortune into something that healed others as much as it healed himself. And Claire stood by his side, no longer just the woman from the diner but the partner who had reminded him what it meant to live, to hope, to love again. Their story became a quiet legend in the state, a reminder that sometimes the richest hearts are found in the simplest places, and that love can bloom even from the ashes of loss. And though life would never be without trials, they faced them together, bound by a love that had begun in silence and grown into something stronger than either of them had ever dreamed. And so it was, that what began as a simple encounter between a weary cowboy and a guarded woman in a small, town diner grew into a love that healed two broken souls. and though the world once whispered that he was poor and worthless, and she believed he had nothing to offer but dust on his boots and silence in his eyes, the truth revealed itself not in the size of his fortune, but in the depth of his heart. And Claire learned that love isn't measured in land or cattle or money tucked away in banks, but in the way a man shows up when the storm rages, in the way he listens when the world grows quiet, in the way he holds your hand when you are too tired to hold it yourself. Luke, once the richest cowboy who had abandoned everything out of grief, found himself rich again in ways no ledger could ever record. Because with Claire he discovered laughter he thought he had lost, hope he thought was buried forever, and the courage to love without fear, and together they rebuilt not only a ranch, not only a future, but a family, one born of faith, trust, and the kind of devotion that makes every sacrifice worthwhile. And as the sun dipped low across the horizon, painting the wide Texas sky with fire and gold, Luke turned to Claire and whispered, "I was never poor, not really, I just hadn't found the one thing that makes a man truly wealthy." Claire, with tears glistening in her eyes, understood at last that she had never fallen for his fortune, she had fallen for the man, the drifter who wasn't drifting anymore, and in that moment, surrounded by the land he once walked away from and the love he had almost given up on, their story found its forever. And friends, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that true wealth lies not in riches but in love, then please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Gentle Words for more stories that stir your soul and remind you of life's most beautiful truths.